Hi there, everybody, and thanks a lot for attending this webinar. I really appreciate your time. Let's hope I can make it as interesting as possible for you. Yeah, as Ruth just introduced me, John Day, I'm the Principal Urban Advisor at the RSPB, based at the Lodge in Sandy, still working from home. And I'm part of a larger team called the RSPB Sector Advice Team, who are basically a bunch of individuals who advise external corporates, be it from farmers, housing developers, green space managers. We've got partnerships with all of these sort of industries. I've said green space managers, golf, solar industry, working with a solar company. So there's various companies or that we have partnerships with, and obviously more widely, there's opportunities when my colleagues within the RSPB asked me obviously for advice or to help someone out, hence my presentation this afternoon. So without wasting any more time, yes, this is obviously, you see I've called it 3 Steps to the Perfect Wildlife Garden. So I shall crack on. First of all, though, I think it'd be a bit amiss to not kind of try and give you a bit of an overview of gardens as a resource. The UK is currently in a wildlife crisis, and UK is actually one of the most nature depleted countries on earth, which is really, really sad. And then one of the easiest ways that we can help wildlife is actually on our own doorstep, what we do in our garden. And gardening for wildlife can make an important contribution. So in terms of how many gardens in the UK, so there's these figures I've actually got from the Wildlife Garden Forum. There's approximately 80% of UK households have a garden, and that's roughly apparently 23 million gardens. And obviously in more built up, higher density urban areas, the proportions are slightly less for obvious reasons. But there's around about 4,300 odd square meters or square kilometers, I should say, of garden. Now, to put that into context for you, I had a quick look and found that it's nearly 5 times the area of the West Midlands. So give you some idea of the kind of resource across the UK. Sizes of the gardens are going to be variable, so they can be small, from just sort of 3.5, 3 meters, right up to just over 2,000 square meters. But apparently the average size of the gardens are round about 200 square meters, plus or minus. So that, I would say, gives you a rough idea of sort of resource that we're looking at, that we can actually, we've all got the potential to do something with to help nature on our own doorstep. Oops, hang on a minute. There we go. Yeah, so this presentation is going to be based roughly on the RSPB's Nature on Your Doorstep project. It's a joint project funded by Barratt, the housing developer. So I'll give you a link to the Nature on Your Doorstep at the end of the presentation. So the Nature on Your Doorstep site is basically provides advice to whatever level you want. There's lots of things you can do, different projects to do. And it's kind of aimed at the individual garden or community garden projects. And it's got a community forum and Facebook group. And although, as I say, this presentation itself is primarily aimed at the new gardens, and the Nature on Your Doorstep is primarily because it's being funded by Barratt, of course, it's aimed at the new householder who's just starting out on their, maybe even their first house or whatever, and they've got a blank canvas. But in all the steps that I will outline, they are transferable and they're applicable as well, equally, with a little bit of thought as to an established garden. So even if you have got an established garden, you should learn something from the Nature on Your Doorstep site. So what I'm going to do is outline the key steps reflected in that guide, and as well to help when you download the guide, so it's free to download. Obviously, I'll put some of the images and graphics in from the guide, just so that then you can kind of relate to that. And when you are doing a wildlife garden, the most important thing to remember is when you are gardening for wildlife, it's how you manage the whole garden, treat the whole thing holistically. A wildlife garden isn't the corner of the garden that you decide I'm going to set it aside for wildlife. and it's not a scruffy, unkempt garden. They actually should look colourful, nice to sit in, pleasing to the eye, attractive to yourselves, friends, neighbours, equally as it is attractive to wildlife. And basically, a good wildlife garden is generally it's managed extensively rather than either not at all or intensively. In other words, just give them a gentle light touch. So I'm going to go through the 3 key steps, which says first few is getting started, then building the basics, the backbone of the garden, and then filling it in and bringing it the whole lot to life. So here we go. So the first thing I would say is getting started. Your garden's got to be functional. And it's got to serve many needs and requirements. Some of those needs and requirements are obviously going to be human and some for nature. So the first thing you want to do is look at the space and decide, well, what do I want from my garden? Do I want seating? And it's just an outline list here in this slide. And you can see, obviously, you might want all or some of the following. So that'd be children. Is there somewhere for the children to play? Do I want to grow vegetables? Do I want a water feature? And so on and so forth. So there are all sorts of things, and just write them down. It's best to write things down, and then you kind of remember them, and you go, oh yeah, that's what I wanted. That's what I want from my garden to meet the needs of the family, or wildlife as well. So first thing is, well, what style of garden? So look around for inspiration. There's all sorts. There's traditional cottage gardens. There's sort of quirky gardens with odd ornaments or plants growing out of wellies or whatever. There's sort of like traditional gardens. You might want a tropically type garden or a drought garden, kitchen garden to grow vegetables. There's all sorts of styles of garden. List is endless. So just look around for inspiration at what inspires you. It's what you want at the end of the day, and as long as it's sympathetic to needs, wildlife will occur in any or most of these places. So just look at what's in the neighbourhood, your neighbours' gardens, public gardens and parks, and then obviously TV, social media, magazines. Go to garden shows, Gardeners World, Hampton Court, Chelsea, although they're always televised anyway. And then there's always part of the open garden scheme across the country. Every summer there's always going to be an open garden near you. Just go and look and get ideas, and then just collect all your ideas and either stick them on a pin board or in a scrapbook and just stick photographs, bits you've ripped out of magazines, whatever you want, however you can relate to it, and annotate them. And then just to get the feel, and you can put, well, I like that bit of that picture but not that bit, and so on and so forth. So just paint a picture for yourself and your own sort of memory of what you need for that garden, or the garden you intend that you want to have. And then obviously the next thing is stages. Well, actually, start scaling it out and putting on the garden. So draw your garden on some square paper. If you've already got existing features like trees, patios, or a pond or a border, mark those on there and take lots of pictures. You can never take too few pictures, and just like all different angles from the bedroom window and all sorts of angles, just to get a feel of what the garden's like. And then obviously once you've gathered all this information, you can then start designing it, plotting the features that you want on the garden, referring back to your scrapbook or whatever, and just sort of then plotting them around the garden. There are computer apps that you can use to actually do all this design as well if you want, if you're that way inclined. And then even your photographs, you could overlay tracing paper onto photographs and draw different concepts on top, on the tracing paper of the photographs of what you'd like to see where, etc. So, and it's not worth rushing into it. It is best to genuinely sit there, take your time and think, give it a lot of thought, and talk amongst yourselves in the household. Don't, even if you've got children, don't exclude them, and just involve everyone in that discussion. So then the garden's for all of you then, rather than it's just one person going, I want this, this and this, without actually consulting with anyone else in the family. So it's good just sit around the table with a cup of coffee and a bit of paper and scribble and write away, whatever. I mean, I was slung this here, another graphic from the guy from the booklet. It's only a small booklet. It's only about 30 pages in it. But yeah, I mean, you could have just a conventional squares, rectangles, straight lines, or you might want to put them on, skew them at an angle, or you might want something kind of quite formal and symmetrical, or you might want to use fences and hedges as screens to create secret parts of the garden, or you might just want curvy borders and things. It's let's say it's your garden. It's whatever you want to do with it at the end of the day. And then obviously on to the next step is just building the basics really, and putting in the foundations of the garden, which is all what they call hard landscaping. It's one of the most expensive elements of the garden, but it does form the foundation around which you then add your soft landscaping. So the extent and materials that you use, again, it's all going to be dependent on your budget. One thing, it is best to try and minimize the amount of hard surface, which, because that obviously reduces the amount of sealed surface where water's going to be running off from and causing potential flooding elsewhere. And obviously, again, I see so many, town centres and even gardens where there's what I term as a dead space. There's a corner on the patio that no one's ever going to use or sit in, and it's, well, actually, could you not have that as a bit of greenery? Because it's not really going to be used. So yeah, I mean, basically, that's obviously plan when you're going to have the paths. And again, the materials you use depends, and what style of path you could have. Like this, the illustration here is almost like stepping stones going off at an angle across the lawn. So it's just, again, just suiting what style you've kind of designed out and your budget at the end of the day. And then, is to form the patio. Patio is obviously really expensive, quite often using the same materials you've made your path from, so paving slabs, or you could have block pavers, as in the illustration here. And obviously they're set on a thick hardcore base, which is impermeable, and the whole thing is, as I say, is very expensive. Some people might want to use decking. So again, if you're using any timber products in the garden, try and make sure they're Forestry Stewardship Council timber approved, from sustainable sources. And obviously the cheapest option is gravel. It's permeable, lets water through into the soil beneath, and you can grow plants in it quite easily. So again, lots of things to consider, but that's all part of all the preparatory work in step one, that you've made all those decisions, say, right, okay, and you cost it all out, and particularly with the hard landscaping, because, as I say, that is probably the most expensive bit of the hard landscape of the garden. And of course, another expense that you're going to have to obviously know that you fork out is if you want a shed or a sum house or a greenhouse. Again, they have to go on a solid base. So again, that's additional cost that you have to factor in. And again, obviously, go for sustainable timber sources, FSC products again. Next slide. So once you've got all your hard landscape sorted, now it's to start finish building off the final bit of the basics. And obviously, I'll stuck a little bit in there. Obviously, I don't know. I mean, some of you might be completely new to gardening and may not have any garden tools whatsoever. There's little prompts there, just like an outline of some. It's not an exclusive list. There's loads more tools that you could probably make use of, but there's just a few, obviously spades, forks, hoes, rakes, etc. Then the next thing to do, once you've got that hard landscaping in, you've got then a garden full of soil. So dig the garden over, and then where necessary, add in topsoils and compost, well-rotted manure. If you've got poor drainage, dig in sharp sand or ballasts, shingle, etc. Once you've dug it all over, raked it all level, you can turf or seed it. Seeding is obviously the cheaper of the two options, but it does take longer to establish. And the beauty of now is it's been recognised there's a market need for flowering lawns, as they're called, and that can either again be turf or seed. What that is a lawn that's got wild flowers growing in it, but like those flowers that grow tolerate regular mowing as long as the mowing's not too short, i.e. not shorter than 5 centimeters. And you can use that either a flowering turf or seed, whichever. You can have a proportion of the garden as a flowering lawn, so you might have just regular turf for most of the garden, and a small section will be of this flowering turf or flowering lawn mix. And then again, when it comes to maintenance, it's regularly mown, but then you can leave a proportion or all of the flowering lawn bit. It's up to you, but you can leave it in for about 6 weeks from late May to early July, just to flower for the pollinators, etc. So again, all sorts of things you can do. There's lots of suppliers for this material now, and those suppliers will provide either advice on their website, or obviously you can talk to their advisors on the phone or something. So they're there. Then there's lots of information available on how to treat or manage your flowering lawn. So nothing to be panicky about, dead easy to do. Just obviously they're going to be more expensive though, but again, it's another choice, it's another option out there for you. Then it's fill up the gaps where you've got your lawn down, but obviously you've left borders, one hopes, whether they're curvy borders, straight lines, whatever, that's all been decided in your early design work. But it's pick the right trees, right size of trees and shrubs for gardens, depending on the size of the garden. So obviously you're going to need smaller trees, smaller gardens, obviously. And the trees and shrubs, again, is another layer of that foundation, and they provide the shade and structure and seasonality of colour in the garden throughout the year, on a mix of deciduous and evergreen varieties of trees and shrub as well. They don't all have to be native, and it's just get a good mix of native and non-native species. And then the hedge obviously can provide a natural they're a natural barrier, but they're permeable barriers, so things can move between through your garden in and out of other gardens, etc. The hedge can be native or non-native, and a native hedge as well. I mean, obviously some people with children might be concerned, oh, I can't have a hedge because it's thorny. Well, actually, there's very few, certainly in terms, there's very few thorny native hedging plants or hedging shrubs. There's probably only about half a dozen or so that are actually thorny. Most of the native shrubs you can use for hedge are non-thorny, and similarly there are non-thorny, non-native hedging shrubs as well. So you've got the choice, and obviously if you've got children or grandchildren, whatever, again, there's thorny shrubs are not an issue. Then obviously there's climbers. They're great. They can cover your shed, the garden wall, the fence, and they just add colour and structure, and somewhere for things like birds to nest in amongst, etc. when they get established. And collectively, all of this put together provides a great habitat and cover for wildlife. It gives wildlife somewhere to shelter, encourages safe passage through the garden or to other gardens, and somewhere for wildlife to forage and breed in as well. So just getting that foundation of trees and shrubs and climbers in is really great. And of course, the next step is what's left, all your gaps, is just stuff them full of flowering plants. Fill the garden with as many types as possible. Perennials are usually cost effectively over time. They're a bit expensive, but then over time you don't have to, they'll regrow every year. You don't have to buy new plants every year. So things like geraniums, the herbaceous geraniums is just one example. They're quick to grow, they're colourful, and there's so many varieties, and it's best as well to try and, where possible, get different flowers that flower throughout the year. And don't forget to get night scented varieties of plants as well for your moths and things too. And pick those that are good for pollinators. And obviously pollinators can be bumblebees, solitary bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, hoverflies, a whole range. And then there's obviously, to find the plants that are pretty good for pollinators, there are 2 websites that you can actually use to give you a rough idea. And one's the RHS's, or Royal Horticultural Society's Perfect Pollinator List, and the other's a Bumblebee Conservation Bee Kind Flower Finder, and they're all really useful. Now, the only thing I would warn you about on there are 1 or 2 plants that they do list that are invasive and will become invasive and damaging to the wider environment and not necessarily just your garden. And they're the sort of things that should be avoided. And I'll come on to invasive plants in a little while. That's a whole completely different topic that I'll just touch on slightly for you. Obviously, the next thing is get some water into the garden. Now, bird bath's obviously the most obvious simple one, but even a small water feature, a barrel, a sunken bowl, or an old Belfast sink, you can get a couple of floating plants in them, and they're easy enough to create, and they'll attract some wildlife. The large pond obviously is the most wildlife rich, and it's probably the most biodiverse feature in a whole garden. But again, aside from your patio, etc., a pond is probably the most expensive part of your, the initial outlay for your soft landscaping. But they're great. They're a magnet, nature magnet. Everything gravitates towards a pond, including us. They're really relaxing to sit by and just watch life go by. At the end of the day, just sit there and relax. But they attract so much wildlife. From dragonflies, amphibians, bees come to drink from the water's edge, birds come to drink, etc., etc. The list of wildlife is endless. So a great feature to have in the garden. I mentioned invasive non-native species, or INS, as the acronym goes. Now, invasive non-native species are one of the biggest threats to nature on the planet. Now, in the UK, 60% of our invasive non-native species that are damaging the environment originate from the horticultural industry. And it's estimated that the cost of the UK taxpayer per year is somewhere in the region of £2 billion. And then obviously, on nature reserves, that money has to come from membership, etc. And again, on nature reserves, these invasive species, they get in, they're carried in, or they drop, so things like it just basically costs a lot of money to tackle things like New Zealand pygmy weed, which again, even the pond you might create in your garden can suddenly have little bits of New Zealand pygmy weed suddenly crop up randomly, which just basically then destroys the whole pond and is really, really difficult to get rid of. Those two species, or that and floating pennywort, are just 2 species that have actually that were introduced as pond plants, but they're now actually banned from sale. And under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, there's a whole suite of plants that you're not supposed to plant. So Schedule 9 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, there's a boring policy bit here, is Part 2 of the Act, is illegal to plant or allow to grow in the wild any plant that's listed on Schedule 9 of the Act. There's another schedule on there, or section of the Act, or part, that covers a whole raft of mammalian and bird and insect species as well. And some of these plants that are not good to plant anymore are ones that us conservationists for years and years in the 1970s kept saying, oh yeah, plant plenty of buddleia or cotoneaster in your garden. So the thing is, buddleia is one of the most invasive plants. Well, both of them, cotoneaster and buddleia, do a horrendous amount of damage. You can see forests of buddleia growing up on every railway line you travel down, and it costs no end of money. They damage buildings and structures, etc., etc. So we discourage people. Buddleia is not on Schedule 9, but we do discourage people from planting them. And if you've got it in the garden, the best way to manage it is just cut the flowers off as soon as the flowers start dying and basically deadhead them to stop them seeding anywhere. And obviously, in cotoneaster again is another plant, great for bees, but unfortunately it's horrendously invasive. And there's some conservation sites that have actually been seriously damaged and destroyed as a result of cotoneasters, usually dropped in bird feces when they've been feeding on cotoneasters in a town, and then go to roost on the nearest chalk downland, and there goes your chalk downland. So you can find some of these lists. The Schedule 9 there's a web link there. And then there's also Natural England Horizon Scanning List, where they looked at and graded about 600 different plants. And they've done a traffic light one. So the red one, the ones they listed as red, are a critical risk that they will become seriously invasive in the near future in this country. And that includes things like most of the honeysuckles or shrub honeysuckles, and things like laurels as well. So yeah, worth having a look at if you want to sort of trawl through, and hopefully you might be as surprised as I was when I saw some of them. Anyway, getting near the end now for you. Hope I haven't run over too much. Obviously, as your garden's going to start evolving year on year, keep taking those pictures, because it is really great to look back at what you've done and achieved, etc. And you can see the changes, and then start to record the wildlife you're seeing. So you can submit records. There's a website called iRecord, and you can either use it as a desktop recording system or on your phone, and you can record from anywhere in the country on that. And that covers all wildlife. So, plants, insects, birds, mammals, fungi, everything you can record on iRecord. Usually there are verifiers that will check that the record is, or they'll try and oversee and think, is that record correct or not? So you might get the odd email now and again going, are you sure? But yeah, and sometimes they might reject it, and you think, oh well, whatever, it doesn't matter, and just or they might ask you for further information. So, but yeah, it's really worth using iRecord, because it does go to the county recorders in a bit of West Midlands for you, I guess. It does go to the county recorders for the various taxa. That then in turn goes to the local biological records centre, and then obviously, if any planning applications come in, the first thing that the consultant ecologists do is go to the biological records centre to buy all the records within a certain radius of the proposed development site. And obviously that's supposed to inform them of what's around and what they need to do, but it's obviously to respect that nature with that planning application. And then obviously one of the most simple engagement tools is the once a year, end of January, RSPB's Big Garden Birdwatch. Or, if you're a little bit keener, the BTO's Garden Birdwatch scheme. So the web links are there. Obviously go and look and find out, and take it from there. And finally, I've been talking about nature on your doorstep. So sign up. Yeah, go and download the booklet. There's the web link. So yeah, and away you go. So finally, thank you very much. And do you have any questions?
Oh, thanks, John. That was great. So yeah, if I'm just going to stop recording, and then if people like to ask John a question perhaps about their own project, then they're very welcome.